Really quickly before we get into the tier list, one thing that I do want to say is the situational category doesn't mean that operators in here are better than the ones below them or worse than the ones above them. Just imagine the situational category is in its own little tier list because you can't really quantifiably put this anywhere and it makes sense. With that out of the way, let's just get straight into it. I won't waste any more of your time. First of all, let's go over Rooney. I think a Rooney is a good every round pick. You can play Rooney every round and be completely fine. I don't think she needs to be buffed or nerfed. I think she's in a pretty good spot right now. A little underwhelming in my opinion, but that's something I'll talk about in a later video. Azami, I think, still is really, really good. I think Azami is outstanding, still a broken operator. I think they need to revert the last change where things have increased damage, and they need to just take away one Kiba barrier from her. I think if they did that, Azami would be fine, because you still be able to destroy her with DMRs, right? DMRs do crazy damage to Azamis, even before they did the initial damage nerf a few weeks ago. So you still have a quantifiable way to nerf her, but also she would still be nerfed to the point where she's not overpowered if they had 4 Kibos. So I think you could still rework Azami in a little bit of a way to where she'd be more balanced, which I think is why Azami is still broken. And the concept of Azami is still broken because you can still make pixel angles. So I think Azami is just absolutely crazy broken still. Melusi, you can play every single round and get value out of. Now, I put Melusi lower in my last tier list before the season came out because Melusi, like, honestly is just a worse version of Fenrir, right? But if Fenrir is banned 80% of games, then you're going to have Melusi 80% of games to fill in that role of Fenrir. So I think Melusi is still a good every round pick. I don't think she's broken, but Melusi doesn't need a buff either. I think Melusi would be a little overpowered if they buffed her, so I think she's in a pretty good spot right now. Someone that definitely needs to be buffed, though, would be Mozzie. Mozzie, without a good scope and without the super shorty, is just really underwhelming. Honestly, I think Mozzie is just a worse version of Mute right now. That's just what Mozzie kind of is. Now, you can have operators that actually underperform in certain scenarios, but are still pretty good, and these are situational operators, the first of which being Castle. You can't play Castle every single site and be viable. Like, sure, you could Castle random windows on the site, but, like, that's not really gonna do much if they're just playing Cali and Ruins on Coastline, right? Like, they're just gonna Cali Lance it. It doesn't make sense, right? So there's certain sites where Castle, like, yeah, you can play him, but you're not gonna get a lot of value out of him is the issue, right? Somebody else who is just like that would be Mira. You can play Mira on every site, you're just not going to get value out of Mira because there's just not a lot of power positions that you can make, or there's just not a single place you can put the Mira that can't be shot from outside. Again, I'll bring you to Coastline. Hookah on Coastline, there is not a single place you can put a Mira window that cannot be shot from outside. So she's completely useless on that site. But she's really strong on, let's say, the Oregon basement, right? So situational at best. Caviera, I think, needs a complete rework. I mean, you could arguably say that Cav just needs a buff, but I think the pure ability of Cav is just not good. Even if they gave Cav great guns, the ability to not be able to deny drones and only be silent is not good, especially even when she has her silent step active and you can still hear her regardless, right? Like, she's just kind of useless in that sense. So they need to rework her in some way, in my opinion. Next, let's go over Clash. I think Clash is situational. Because of this current meta, people are starting to see the actual viability of shield operators right now, especially operators like Blitz or Monty. Even Fuse Shield is being played, and I think Clash, if you know how to play her, especially from a distance when you're casually zapping people to slow down the attack or rush, which is kind of meta right now, then Clash can actually be situationally pretty good. But you can't really play Clash every round because there's just some sites where you're just going to get ran at, especially on smaller maps. Next is Frost. Frost, you can pick every single round and get value out of Frost. Pretty self-explanatory. Deployable shield, no recoil SMG with an ACOG on it, an ability that at the very least gets you some information when they shoot it. So I think she's pretty good overall. Next is Goyo. You can play Goyo every single round and Goyo be good. You've got a Vector with an ACOG, which is pretty crazy, and then you have a TCSG at worst. So I think Goyo is pretty good. Next is Pulse. Pulse is pretty situational. You can only play Pulse on certain sites. Anyone who's played the game for a year probably knows that, so I'm not really going to go too in-depth on that. Something that I do think is situational that a lot of people are going to argue with me on is Cade and Bandit. And for that matter, let's talk about Turbo. Where is he? There you are. These three operators, you're only going to need on sites where you need a wall closed. I'll take you to Coastline again. The only site you'd need any of these three is like Penthouse. You're never going to need a Cade or a Bandit or a Turbo on hookah or in kitchen, unless you want to keep the triple wall closed. But if you have all 3 of those walls reinforced and not a rotate there anyways, you're already lacking. So like, you don't need these operators on every single site. They are situational. Someone who is a lot less situational though would be Legion. I think Legion before the nerf was broken. I mean, honestly, I still feel like Legion is broken. Like, the one counter to shields right now that is reliable, even after impact grenade nerfs, still has impacts, still has a super shorty. So I think Legion is pretty good. I think if they nerfed Legion, again, no one would complain. I think if they took away his super shorty or his impact grenades, preferably the super shorty, I think Legion would be like a good every round pick. But he's just too versatile right now. He has too much utility. If you check out my attacker tier list, I talked about how all of the operators like Dokkaebi, like Jackal, like Ying, they all had one thing in common, and that was that they had tons of utility secondarily, that they were just way too versatile. And I think Legion and Azami are both on that train. Next, let's go over Rook. Rook is a pretty good every round pick. He doesn't really need to be buffed. He has one of the highest win rates on defense, Emerald and above, in the entire game. He has for many seasons. He's in the best state that he's ever been in right now, especially with ACOGs being super meta. The same can be said for Doc. You can play these 2 operators every round and no one will complain. Don't listen to content creators who are like, well, it's healing, it's not all that good. You can't, like, Doc isn't as good as like a Goyo. That's true, but you can still play them every single round because specifically of their gun. He also brings a bailiff. He also brings barbed wire or a bulletproof camera. He also brings impact grenades for shields. I am a man of statistics and proof, and statistically, this operator does really well, and Doc is just pretty versatile. So you can play them every round and have fun, especially in the lower elo. Next is Smoke. Smoke is a good every round pick. I almost want to put Smoke in situational now because you can't really play Smoke unless you have wall denial. Or some other type of utility that's going to waste time, like Azami, like Legion, or like Melusi, or like Fenrir. Because Smoke specializes in late round gameplay. He's the perfect anchor, right? And anchors are only supposed to be getting actual action with utility in gunfights in the late round if their roamers are doing their job. So if they have a wall open within the first 30 seconds, and you don't have a Legion, an Azami, a Melusi, or a Fenrir to slow them down, you're going to end up wasting your smoke grenades within the first minute of the round, 2 minutes of the round, right? So you won't be able to use them to their full effectiveness later in the round, which is why I think unless you have teammates to help you slow them down initially, smoke's not going to be as useful as somebody like one of these operators or like an Azami. So I think smoke is actually situational because you have to depend on your teammates being good in order for you to get the most usefulness out of smoke. I know that's a hot take. As a smoke player and a smoke main myself, I know that's a hot take, so bear with me. Next up is Maestro. I think you could probably play Maestro every single round and be fine, but I don't think you should. I think Maestro's pretty situational. With 3 cameras and a bailiff and an LMG and impact grenades though, I might be tripping. I think I'll put Maestro in every single round, honestly. You can play Maestro every single round and get value. I think you really can. I think you honestly can. Whereas an operator like Echo, you probably couldn't. I think Echo's just a worse version of Maestro right now. As somebody who has made probably the most amount of Echo lineups on the entire internet out of any Siege content creator, I am a nerd about Echo. I think Echo is extremely underrated. Even I still think Echo is situational. You just can't play him every single site. There's not lineups that you can use now that his cameras aren't invisible. So like you need certain places that you can put his cameras, and not every site and map has those. So I think Echo is pretty situational at best. Next up is Mute. I think Mute is an every round pick. I don't think Mute is broken because I don't think that they should nerf Mute. I think if they nerfed Mute, I would be pretty unhappy about it. So I think Mute is like a good every round pick. You can play Mute every round. Honestly, because he's not even that broken, you wouldn't even want to play Mute every single round. But you can. You can still get value out of him if you do. He's a pretty well-rounded operator in my opinion. Next up is Oryx. I think Oryx needs a buff. I don't think he needs a rework because there can be situations where he's like a fine operator to use. His utility is pretty fun, especially if you're trying to counter shields, which again I said were pretty good. But I think he could use a buff. Now, I've suggested many times that they give Oryx passive healing. I think this would make Oryx broken. Arguably too broken. So they'd have to make the passive healing a little bit slow. Or they'd have to make it to where the passive healing only happened if you actually used him for walls. What passive healing would do is it would make it to where if you actually rammed into a wall to make a rotate, you could heal that back, and you wouldn't need a Thunderbird or a Doc on your team to make that something that you could do. Because right now, as Oryx, it's just not worth it to make rotates with your body and waste all of that HP when you can just do it with your Bailiff or have a teammate do it for you, right? But if you have passive healing, it makes it super worth it. The site setup is faster, you get all the health back, you get to use Oryx as his ability is intended, and then your teammates also save time because they don't have to make rotates, right? And it also gives them a pretty good ability as well. So I think if they gave Oryx passive healing, I think he'd be pretty good as an operator. Let me know what you think of that down in the description though, or down in the comments, sorry. But I think that's a pretty good buff. Next is Warden. This is gonna be a little weird, but I think, honestly, even after the 2.5 is gone, you could play Warden every single round, because right now, there's a lot of smoke plants going on. Me personally, most of my attack runs, I'm playing Monty with my teammate as a gridlock, and we're getting smoke plants down. It happens so often because it's the one counter to the defender meta right now. People playing Azami, people playing Fenrir, people playing Cade, people playing Turbo, people playing Legion, right? So, like, smoke plants are really kind of in right now in the attacker meta, at least in the champion lobbies that I'm in. I don't know about y'all. So you could play Warden every single round. I think Warden is in the most healthy state that he's been in every single round. But I don't think you should play Warden every single round. You really should only play Warden on sites that you know smoke plants are common on. Let's take Archives Unboarded, for example. Every time that I go top floor border, I want a Warden on my team, just on the off chance that they do an east side take with a Monty, right? Other sites like Hookah on Coastline, people like to use smokes on that site too. So, like, you can kind of predict that they're going to use smokes on certain sites. So I think Warden's situational at worst, and I think you could play Warden every single round, even if you don't want to. Next is Solus. I think Solus needs a nerf. Now, they are going to nerf Solus. They're going to make it to where Solus can't use the gadget in the prep phase, which is perfect. I was asking for that nerf seasons ago, so that is the perfect nerf in my opinion. I'm so glad they're doing it, but they haven't done it yet. So until they do it, she's going to be in the nerf them category, and then once they do, I'll move her down a notch, but we're not there yet. Someone who I think actually needs a buff would be Tachanka. I don't think Tachanka needs a rework, and I'll tell you why. There's two things that Tachanka is actually really good at. Countering Maverick, because you can shoot fire through Maverick holes and he can't get the wall open, which wastes a shit ton of time if Maverick wasn't slow enough already. And then also countering shields. When I'm a Monty player, my biggest fear isn't a Legion, it isn't an Oryx, it isn't impact grenades, it isn't an Azami or a Fenrir. It's actually a Tachanka. I have lost more rounds as a Monty player against a Tachanka than I have any other operator. So I think Tachanka is pretty good against shield operators. Next is Thorn. I think Thorn could use a buff. She's pretty underwhelming. But also, if they buffed Thorn, I think she would be like... She wouldn't be overpowered. No, if they buffed Thorn, I would never complain about it. I think Thorn definitely could use a buff, for sure. Same thing with Thunderbird as well. The worst healing operator in the game. I think they should have at least kept her Nitro Cell, or given her some good scopes and she would have been viable, or just buff her damn ability. It's so bad. Give her a 4th healing station, or make it to where attackers can't use the healing. Like, I don't know. I think Thunderbird definitely needs a nerf, and I know most people would agree with me as well. Or not nerf, sorry, buff. Someone who needs an actual nerf, though, is Valkyrie. Valkyrie is pretty underrated right now. People like Azami and Fenrir and Solus are super strong, that people just forgot how strong Valkyrie was. But they haven't nerfed her since they nerfed her outside cam. So it's not like she is worse. Like, she's still a really good operator. I find that when I play Valkyrie, I get a lot of value. And when I go against a good Valkyrie player, it is the most annoying bullshit to deal with on the planet. So Valkyrie still, I think if they nerf Valkyrie, no one would complain. Honestly. Next is Vigil. I think Vigil you could play every single round with the addition of Deimos, with the ability to counter Grim and Lion, who are being played a lot right now. I think Vigil's actually a pretty good roamer. Next is Wamai. I think Wamai is good every single round that you play Wamai. It's Wamai. You can play him every single round at every single site, and you will get a lot of value out of him, especially with that 2.5 time scope with the impact grenades for shields. Wamai is just an outstanding operator right now. Next, let's move on to his twin, Jaeger. I think Jaeger honestly could use a buff. I'm not saying that Jaeger is as bad as Thunderbird, or as bad as Thorn, or as bad as Tachanka, or Mozzie, or Oryx. This category specifically is just operators that I think need a buff. This isn't like a C tier. This isn't a normal tier list. This is a very weird tier list. Trust me, I know I'm the one that made it. But I think if they buffed Jaeger, nobody would complain, right? The gun now, after all the nerfs, kind of sucks, especially compared to Wamai's AUG or the MP5 with an ACOG. The ADSs are still pretty good, but you could just play Wamai and be a little bit better than a Jaeger ADS. So if they buff Jaeger, I don't think anyone would complain. I don't think they would. But the issue is that you could play Jaeger every round and he'd be useful. So it's like, I think I have to stick him in here just for that. I don't know, I'm conflicted. Let me know what you think of Jaeger down in the comments, because I'm a little conflicted here. Someone who definitely needs a buff is Ella. Ella is pretty dog shit. She is good for countering shields, so if you notice running shields, you can run Ella for that, but other than that, I don't think Ella's really that good. I think if she had worse weapons, she'd be the worst operator in the entire game, hands down. Capcan is good every single round. You can make an argument for nerfing. I don't really think so, though. If you know how to play Capcan, you can get a guaranteed kill every single round. I'm in champion lobbies, and I know how to play Capcan really well. I'm not trying to, like, glaze myself, but I get almost a guaranteed kill every single round. Like, my KD on Capcan is crazy, especially in lower ranks, and people don't know how to look for your traps. Oh my god, dude, it's just free kills all day. If you're not doing well, like you're not warmed up, your aim is terrible, just play Capcan every round. You'll be fine. Fenrir definitely needs a nerf. Now, they're going to nerf Fenrir, but until they do it, again, just like Solus, completely broken operator. I think Fenrir is a little overrated. I don't think he needs to be banned 81% of all games, but, like, still a pretty broken operator. And before we end the tier list, even though that was all of the defenders... Oh, wait, no, we missed Alibi. Alibi needs a buff. I think anyone that's played Alibi knows that. But anyways, now that we've gone over the entire tier list, I want to compare this to my previous tier list that I made before this season even came out, which was this one right here. Now, the reason that I'm comparing this, by the way, is because I made this tier list before the season came out, so a lot of the information was inaccurate, which is why I felt the need to make this tier list in the first place, because I don't want to give y'all inaccurate information. So we're going to skip to the end here and look at the operator placements and just see, like, what I would have changed and why I changed it. So Mute, I thought would be broken every single round, but not a lot of people are droning nowadays, so I don't think Mute is that broken. Alibi, I think, I glaze Alibi a lot because I think she has a lot of hidden potential, but unless you're using observation blockers on a site where observation blockers are, like, good, you're not going to get usefulness out of Alibi. It's just not going to happen. Thorn, I put in good every round because she had a deployable shield, and I knew people were going to start rushing because I watched Pro League, because I knew people were going to play shields. So I thought Thorn would be good. She's not. Doc Rook, yeah, okay. This all makes sense. Legion, I had no idea would be so good, which is why I want to move him up. Warden, I want to move up. Aruni, I want to move up. So, yeah. Anyways, that's why I made the tier list, because I made both of my tier lists way too early. So I thought I'd give you an updated Defender tier list, but that's pretty much it for this video. Check out this next video. My name's Alka, and I'll see you in the next one. Later.